Hello, James.
Hello. Hi, nice to see you.
Nice to see you after a long time.
Lalit. How is your child?
My child is currently in my wife's custody. Otherwise, he would have been here sitting on my lap watching the conference. That would have been best. Because he liked to test the stuff on my computer, and I told him not
Uh,
now.
are you enjoying being a father? Is that fun
Absolutely,
for you?
absolutely, absolutely.
I didn't enjoy it at first, but the older he got, the more I enjoyed it. And he's 26 now, and he made me a huge 4 loaves of bread for Father's Day, and I love watching videos with him. I mean, it's just I'm so glad he only lives 10 minutes away from me. Uh, but I just feel like I'm getting all the benefits of being a father now, all of them.
Cool. Thank you, James. We will be on the stage. I believe you're already on the stage.
I'm
Everyone,
ready to go.
super. Here is James for
Sh-
you. I don't think James really needs an introduction, but I must
uh,
mention that it's a very special honor for me to introduce James on the same platform. So thank you, James, and I won't take more time. Stage is
all
yours.
right. All right. I want to share my screen now. Here I go. Sharing my screen. Hope you see it. I can't tell if anybody can see it, so I'm just looking at the Slack channel right now. Oh, did you give me a thumbs up? Now I'm seeing you. All right, here we go. Uh, Here's the QR code to see my slides if you want to see them, and let's get right into it. I searched for the term stages of testing. It was either testing stages or stages of testing. I searched for that on Google. The first link that I got took me to this page for a test lab that I'm not going to name, but they're a test lab that should know better than to print this. This is common. It's not exactly their fault. It's very common. People for all the time that I've been in testing, which is more than 30 years, I've been seeing variations of this from the V model, uh, waterfall stuff, and it tells us that first we have to exactly know what we want to do, and then we have to do all the analysis, and only then. You see, it says, if the testing team has reached this stage, it means there is no confusion or misunderstanding, concerning the test plan, validation matrix, or test cases. Then I suppose you implement all that stuff, you execute. Stage 6 here is bug fixing, which is odd because it's not even a stage of testing. That has to do with development. All right, well, here's my problem with it. It's totally false. Nobody follows this process. No one ever has followed this process. If you follow this process, you will not do good testing. You will do very bad testing. And we need to save our industry from this kind of stuff. I've been trying to stop it for 30 years, so it's unlikely that it's going to stop. But what I want to offer you now is a different way to look at testing that is actually practical, realistic. It actually happens. I do it. Okay? And it begins like this. Instead of having a bunch of stages that I pre-specify, what I do is I begin with this conjecture. Here it is. It's called the Bootstrap conjecture. Any process that we care about and that is done well and is done efficiently began by being done poorly and inefficiently. Another way to say this is, if you've ever done something right the first time, then you either didn't do it right or it wasn't your first time. Because nobody does anything right the first time unless it's super easy to do and anyone can do it, or it's possible you could get super lucky. But if it's not easy and you don't get super lucky, then it was not the first time you did it. Here's an example. One of the things that I've done is scuba dive. And when you scuba dive, you use these tables, these mathematical tables that tell you how long you can stay at different depths and not get injured, not get sick with decompression sickness. Those tables were created because people died while diving. That's how we know what's safe and what's not safe. It's because of all the people who got sick, all the people who got injured, all the people who died because they tried to go under the water and they stayed too long and too great a depth. That's why I was able to do it safely, is because it might have been my first time, but it wasn't the first time. And I benefited from all the wisdom of those people that came before me. Unfortunately, in the world of testing, in the world of development, every project is unique and new in many, many ways. And you can't just take general ideas that somebody has come up with from a completely different context and assume that everything's going to work exactly the same for you in your context. What that means is that every time we start a project, we are confused. And we must embrace that confusion. And this is what I call the Bootstrap Approach. It is to begin in confusion and to end in precision. When I get to as I get toward the end of my process, I will get more and more systematic. But in the beginning of my process, I am wholeheartedly embracing the necessary confusion, because I have to go through the learning process. And when I see people who pretend that you don't have to do learning when you're testing because you just follow best practices, you just read the spec and then you just know everything, well, that's ridiculous. And it's just totally wrong, and everybody knows it. But if you're young enough in this industry, even though you think it's wrong, you think the problem is you. You say, you know, this stuff doesn't make sense, but it must be something wrong with me. So I am here at the age of 54, having been in testing for 33 years, to tell you it's not you. It's not you. It's, if you're confused and you're wondering how come these project plan templates tell me that I'm supposed to know all my test cases before I execute any tests, it's because those templates were written by people who don't understand testing. This is what the process actually feels like. This is a highly technical diagram, as you see. This is what it feels like for me, whether I'm at the beginning of a medical device project, and I have tested medical devices in a formal environment, or whether I'm in a court case where I have to write a 300-page test report. The beginning of both of those processes, although they're highly formalized at the end, at the beginning they're very playful and chaotic, and that's good. Let me tell you how you can sort it out. Instead of having a set of stages that is rigorously defined, how about we start with a role? I can have a testing role, an ongoing agreement to perform some kind of work. I can, within the role, talk about threads. I use the term thread. You might have a different word for this, but you know, there are possibly recurring activities, things that we have to, like regression testing. We do regression testing, later on we have to do it again. I call those threads. And we can have really general threads, really specific threads. You can think of threads as to-do items on a to-do list, except the to-do items keep coming back again. I'll give you some examples in a moment. I use the word stage to talk about a block of time where people are working on something. And I'd use the word session to talk about an uninterrupted block of time that's usually of a fixed length, like 90 minutes, where I am focused on testing during that session. And the nice thing about sessions is you can count them. Unlike test cases, you can count them pretty safely. So if I say I've done 10 sessions, and you know that my standard session is 90 minutes long, you know I've done about 3 days of testing. And another person who says they've done 10 sessions has also done about 3 days of testing. It isn't that one person did 10 sessions in 5 minutes and the other one did 10 sessions in 5 weeks. But with test cases, you can't know. So I use these ideas to sort things out. I talk about my role, what my responsibilities are, my threads, the different stages of my work, and different sessions that I might have done. This is on from an actual project where I did, this is for about 4 days of testing, and I did 22 distinct stages of work in the 4 days. And the reason why, because you wonder, 22 stages in 4 days, that these stages are very, very short. Some of them were actually physically longer than that. The whole work, the 4 days worth of testing that I did, I'm estimating 4 days. It happened over a 3-week period where I was working on different things. So I reconstructed this. I was taking notes all along. So I reviewed the problem. I negotiated my mission. I reviewed and diagrammed a specification. I was consulting with my clients. I was consulting with specific colleagues. I was trying different kinds of testing. I was writing some code. And here's where I would put my threads. Over here, I would say that when I developed my basic test jig to interact with the product with my automation, I was doing a setup thread, and I was doing shallow testing, my shallow testing thread. And I switched later on to deeper testing, going into depth on specific kinds of test techniques. I did product analysis. I didn't do my product analysis all at the beginning and then it was forever done. I keep coming back to product analysis. That's the thing about threads. You keep coming back to them. So this is very different from the test stages that we just saw. I like to visualize it like this. Michael Bolton says he doesn't understand this diagram. Maybe you won't either, but it makes sense to me. These threads start here and they're going off into the distance. You see, that's the horizon out there. And each of these is a thread, and I'm bouncing to different threads as I'm going forward in time. This is my path. The little black thing is me hopping along. These are stages. So every stage I'm working on different threads, and I'm servicing these threads until I'm finished with the project. That's kind of how I visualize it in my mind. The subject matter of these threads are all these kinds of things. We call this the gears diagram in rapid software testing. These are 5 different dynamics that are at play whenever I am on a testing project. I'm building my knowledge. I'm doing analysis. I'm telling stories about my work to myself and others. I'm working with other people. And of course, I'm encountering the product. And there's lots of details, lots of different kinds of work that I can do in there. And that's when I'm talking about the threads. I'm talking about all this kind of stuff. And then there are the interfaces between the gears, which I give names to. Analysis plus storytelling is self-management. Knowledge plus analysis is learning. Other people plus analysis is collaboration. And accounting the product plus analysis turns out to be performing tests. That's how I think about it. I don't have much time to talk about this stuff because I want to get into details. I'm going to show you some details now. This is a session that I did with Michael Bolton couple months ago. We were analyzing the testability of a particular product we were supposed to be testing. The thing we're testing is this thing called a packed circle diagram. It's a special kind of visualization. What we're trying to test is the accuracy of this visualization, which is representing the sizes of files on a disk. And we're trying to find out if this is a correct visualization. That's the idea. So, Michael and I spent an hour looking at this, and we analyzed the testability, and we improved the testability of this product while doing that. So, let me show you what the story was of that work. And the first thing is I had to explain this product to Michael because he wasn't familiar with it. So he began asking me questions and forming models of it. So this is really sped up, right? You're just seeing us. This is the exact video. It's sped up, I think, by a factor of 8 times. And I've put subtitles in here. I've also put this video in regular time with all the audio on it. I've put it on YouTube, so if you want to watch this and see how we did our testability work, you're welcome to see it. The link to that is coming up on the next slide. So I'm showing how we're going to test this, and so I try to get some original file data, and I want to see what the size of a file is, and then I want to compare that to what's going on the screen. So we're trying to find the file and relate it to the display. So Michael is asking, how does the data from the file, about the file, get into the program? And I say, well, it's in this JSON here, and I'm showing him the JSON. And he is building a model. He's drinking in the information about this. We call this process sense making, making sense of the product. And if you watch yourself while you test, you'll find you do a lot of sense making when you test. It's the major activity of testing, actually, is looking at the screen and asking yourself, what's going on with that? What's happening with that? Oh, I see Michael Bolton is in the Slack channel answering questions. Thank you, Michael, for doing that in real time. That's why he's my buddy. Okay, then we're trying to hand calculate the area of the circles so that we can compare them to the sizes of the files. So here we are actually performing what we call an output check, which is a subset of testing. And then we start thinking about how can we make this more testable. So we're looking at the document object model. That's what we're about to do here. And we're trying to figure out how can we change the document object model to add something to it. Right there, we just added something to it. We know enough about JavaScript to do this kind of thing, and technical skills like this are quite helpful to have in testing. Although you don't need them, you should have a friend at least who has them. So Michael and I know enough about this so that we can add a special tag to the DOM which identifies the file on every circle so that we can automate the checking that we want to do. We want to read this file and automatically check the accuracy of every single one of the circles instead of doing it by hand. That's why we're going to add a special tag. That's the testability feature that we're going to add. Now notice that I'm not doing all the analysis up front. I'm in a state of relative confusion. I've picked something. I've picked a thread. The thread is, let's figure out if we can improve the testability of this product. And I haven't figured out what my test cases are going to be or whether I'm going to automate them or not. All this stuff is still speculative. It's still in the future. And that's okay. I don't need to figure all this stuff out at the same time. This is real testing to me, folks. This is what I actually do. And then at this point, Michael spots a problem with something I'm thinking of doing, and he says, wait a minute, we could have a problem with this because how do you know if you have a hierarchy of files, how do you know where the file is in the hierarchy? And so we're talking about how I'm going to discover a way to figure out what the hierarchy is without having to add any more testability. And then I realized that if you zoom in, this might change the results of the test. So we have to check if that's true. We don't know, so this is more learning. Okay, I'm going to move to the next slide now because I'm trying to give you a taste of this, and I think I've given you a taste of it. You can watch it in regular motion with full audio if you want to. So now I'm going to show you the same video, but I'm going to speed it up by 4 times more fast. So really, really fast. And what I'm going to do is I've identified these interesting threads: testability work, sense making, checking, which is the automatable form of evaluation, whereas testing, we say in RARIS-T, is not automatable, checking is. Data wrangling, that's where we're working on getting data to the right place so that we can do our checking and our testing. Using tools, making tools, thinking critically about our method, trying to find if there's a problem with our test design, and storytelling, summarizing what we're doing, reporting what we're doing, checking with each other if what we're doing is what we think we're doing. Those are some interesting different threads. And if you play the video quickly, this shows, in my opinion, where we have done those things. And what you see is, this is what I mean by weaving the threads, that we move from checking back to learning and sense making, and then we move to data wrangling, and then we start playing with some tools, and then we realize we need to make a tool, and we try to make it, we prototype it, and because we have to go to the developer if we want to keep our testability tags in the product, so we're prototyping a tool by doing that. Then we spot problems. Then we try to investigate those problems to see if we can solve them, and then we go back to summarizing what it is that we've done in this session, and so forth. You see this interplay of all these different elements. I believe that we become more powerful as a testing industry when we start looking at how people actually test. Instead of assuming that people figure everything out beforehand and they always have perfect specs and they always know what their test cases should be, and if they know what a test case is, they write it down, and all test cases should be written down. All that's nonsense. Sometimes I write test cases down. Sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't even use test cases. Sometimes I automate. Sometimes I don't. I always automate something. I'm always using tools in some way, and I'm usually, I would say every project I create tools. Every project. But that's partly because I'm a programmer, so it's a skill that I have, so of course I'm doing it. I alternate between being very critical of what I'm doing and thinking, how could this be wrong? Or just doing it and not being critical. I alternate amongst all these different things and more that I haven't mentioned that aren't here. These are just the interesting ones. So this is the link if you wanted to go and see the whole video. And this is genuine work that Michael and I were doing and you see us stumble around as we're trying to figure out this thing because we're not entirely familiar with this product. But we wanted to create this because we wanted to show people what real work looks like, done by actual adults. And by the way, you're going to see us stumble around in this video, and you should know something, and that is that Michael and I are experts. We are experts at this, and then you see us stumbling around. This gives you information. This should tell you that, oh, even experts stumble around. That's right. We didn't want to make this overly polished. We wanted to do something that was authentic, that represented how real people work. And I hope some of you will make videos and send me links showing your genuine testing work, and then showing your analysis of the testing work. I hope you do that. We call these testopsies. They're autopsies for test sessions. Now let's go back to this stage thing. Let's look at it closely. Software testing should always begin with establishing a well thought out test plan to ensure an efficient execution of the entire testing process. My reaction to that is no, testing should begin in any way that allows reasonable progress. That's how testing should begin. Any way at all that you can reasonably progress, given the uncertainties, given the staffing, that's the way you should do it. Whenever anyone says you should have known X at the beginning of your project, what you can say back to them is, at the beginning of a project, I don't know anything. At the beginning. What you seem to be saying is you wanted me to have studied up on what to do before the project even started. And that's not reasonable. How about this? Analysis. At this stage, functional validation matrix is made. Okay, in-house or offshore testing team analyzes the requirements and test cases. I'm not sure how this is possible because the test cases don't exist yet. So I guess they mean they create the test cases here, except later they say they create the test cases in another stage. So I really don't know why test cases is here. Maybe this means test cases that you're reusing from another project. My response to this is we should learn and analyze the product at the same time we are testing it. What I do if I have to do formal testing that's highly organized is I start by testing the product informally, because how I create good formal tests is by doing informal testing, and that's how you do it too. That's how everybody who ever does good formal testing created the formal testing. You know, those old masters who created these amazing paintings, whether it's the Mona Lisa or whatever, they did sketches first. They did studies first. Then they made the paintings that are so famous. And even then, they would make mistakes in their final painting, and they'd have to paint over their mistakes. That's normal. So that's what the master painters, that's what Da Vinci did. Why do we think we're better than Da Vinci and we're better than Michelangelo? We learn and analyze while we are testing. We don't wait to test. Okay, what about this? If the testing team has reached a stage, there's no confusion. Well, we can just ignore that. That's totally not true. The team makes suitable scripts for automated test cases and generates test data. You mean you waited all the way to now before you generated test data? Boy, I'm working with test data on day one. How about this? How about we expect confusion and misunderstandings at all times? You must always be ready to find out that you didn't understand the product properly. You can never know that you've understood it properly. You can never know if other people understand things properly. But we certainly don't postpone our test design until the confusion is all gone. We're going to have to start test design right away, more or less. Okay? Development. And what do I say about that? I'm saying these are interwoven threads. Analysis, design, development. Instead of focusing on stages, I suggest you focus on threads and you let the stages almost take care of themselves. Now, what I generally do is instead of predicting exactly when I'm going to be doing exactly what, I might have a general idea that this week I'm going to be doing this, next week I'm going to be doing that. And of course, a lot of that's just driven by the development process, especially in an agile environment. But if someone says, I need you to do all your analysis now and then stop doing analysis, I go, you don't seem to understand how thinking works and how testing works and how engineering works, because actually the whole point of Agile is you're not supposed to think about and settle everything in advance. You're supposed to do it incrementally. So they're interwoven threads. How about this? Let's see. As soon as the entire scripting has made its execution begins. No one is going to do that. Then we have the bug fixing stage, which apparently only happens apparently days and days, weeks after you start. All I can say is no. And also, bug fixing is not a testing stage. It's a development thing that happens in parallel with testing. And I believe the people who wrote this knew that. I believe the reason they wrote this is because they weren't taking seriously their own document. They weren't really reading it and believing that it was true. I think the people who wrote this wrote it for customers because they thought that customers wanted to hear this, and not because they actually believe this is true. Finally, software is implemented. Well, I would say we engage with users and monitor the quality after release. And when they say it's delivered to end user who tests it, I never expect end users to test anything. They're bad testers. But of course we pay attention to any concerns that they have. And we learn about any problems that escaped the field because we want to improve our process. So this is what I mean by weaving the thread of testing. We should stop thinking in terms of normative stages of testing. We should instead evaluate the context and the situation of testing. We should build the skills to analyze products, to conceive of test designs, to do them informally, and then to formalize them if we feel that we need to formalize them. This includes automation. And I think I mentioned actually on one of these slides something I wanted to emphasize. I've recently been hired by Tricentis. I'm not working with them full time. I've got a contract with them, but I'm doing something kind of exciting. I'm actually on a development team now, and I'm developing test tools. I'm coming up with the vision. I'm coming up with the user journeys. I am prototyping the user interfaces with the help of the UX people. I'm designing these things. So I'm not normally on the development side of things. I was a developer many, many years ago. But since I'm a tester who has a passion for good tools, they've brought me in to try to help them design tools that smart testers want to use. And I'm telling you, right now, as I'm working with Tricentis, I can tell you, we are weaving our threads together. It's not figure everything out before we write any code, because we're writing experimental bits of code. I'm writing experimental bits of code so that I can prototype and figure out what's reasonable. Only then will I know what I want to put in the requirements document. Only then will I want to know what the key elements of the product should be. This is a research and development project. So I already knew this is true, but I'm telling you that right now I'm actually on a project and I'm seeing it happen all around me. What I'm saying is reality. And I'll bet it's not just my reality. I bet it's also your reality if you pay attention to it. So I urge you to try once in a while, try recording a piece of your testing on a video and closely analyze exactly what did you do during that video. And I think you'll be surprised, because I think you won't realize all the different things, all the different kinds of thinking that you do until you look really closely at it. Anyway, Michael Bolton and I teach this stuff online. This is the closest thing to a marketing thing I'm going to do. I'm just going to tell you, hey, that's my website, and you should know that we teach rapid software testing classes, and hopefully in a couple of years we'll come out with some fantastic tools that I'll be talking about to anyone who wants to be a more powerful, more intellectual tester. All right, I'm finished with my my talk, Lalit. If you want to send me questions, I am ready to go.
Yes, James, I would rather ask them to you right here. We have the most upvoted question here. How do you measure success of this approach, from Praveen?
We don't measure success. We assess success. And this is a very important difference. We measure things like temperature. You can measure temperature. You can measure the weight of something. But when you're talking about a human social system and how people feel about it, that's something which is assessed. That means that we can collect evidence about it, and then we consider the evidence. So how would we? I'm going to change the question to how would we assess the success of this? To me, one of the major elements of understanding the success of a way of thinking about testing is, can the CEO or anyone high enough in management or in the ownership tree who needs to run the company, can they ask the testers, the people doing testing, about the status of testing, and can they get clear, cogent, useful, truthful information? And right now, the answer is usually no for this. And if you say, oh yeah, I just count test cases and I tell them that I have 400 test cases and 390 test cases pass, well, you're not telling them anything, because no one who's not an expert is going to understand that. And I am a testing expert, and I know I don't understand it. I know that if you tell me you have 400 test cases, I can't say, oh, that's a lot of testing. That's so much testing, Lalit. You have 400 test cases worth of testing. That must be a huge amount of testing. Because you and I both know, Lalit, that we can write a script that will generate 400 test scripts in 2 seconds or in 30 seconds. So that doesn't mean that somebody carefully slaved over the testing forge and forged each test case like it was an elven sword to slay orcs with. It might be that these are terrible test cases. So when someone tells me, here's my test case count, I tell them, I have no idea. You're going to have to tell me, what are you covering? What risks are you focusing on? Where's the weakness in your testing? What tools are you using? What tools should you be using? What are your test environments? So if you don't have the ability to break down the status of testing in a coherent way, which, by the way, is what this is. Remember this slide right here? This is one of many tools that I use to teach testers to break down their testing story in a way that non-testers can question and get value from. But if you can't do that, then I assess that your testing is in big trouble, because management can't, they just treat testing as a magical process. So how the number one way that I would use to assess this is, are management actually able to benefit from an understanding of how the testing is working in their organization? Or are they being lied to and deceived by nonsense metrics that we know don't really tell them anything? What's your next question?
We have an ever-changing leaderboard here. Now, the second question is how to convince management that testing stages is not right. I believe Ram means to say.
Okay, the first thing you have to do is you build your credibility. So testing is a highly social activity. You have to build your social skills. You have to know how to talk to people. You have to know how to sound like an expert. For instance, there is a particular woman who is attending today, I believe. Her name is Juka. She was here earlier. Maybe she's still here. There she is. She just posted in the Slack room. Now, yes, I am going to call you out, Juka. Juka is, as far as I know, I would say among all the testers that I currently have met in the last few years, she's the single best tester I have heard about at talking to management. She seems to have her management twisted around her little finger. She is on a process of changing the culture of her organization, and she's gotten a bunch of people to go along with her who have the power to ignore her. But she has made herself quite difficult to ignore because she's practiced explaining and talking about this stuff. Plus, she's got a lot of force in her character. She's got a lot of assertiveness. Now, I have to say that she's operating in America, which is very different than operating in India. I would say, I've said this before publicly about testers in India. Anytime I've taught testers in India, I've been really shocked at how smart you are, how creative you are. The passion that I see in my classes, I just don't see that anywhere else in the world, but I know I'm going to see it every time I teach in India. But the test managers in India are among the most backward of all test managers. You have the best testers working for the hardest to work with managers in India, and it's kind of a sad situation. But you need to learn how to talk to these guys so that they take you seriously, and it has to do with you know, how respectful you are, but also how much you know, how fast you talk, how old you are. Um, I am benefiting from the fact that I have gray hair. People listen to me more just because of that. Juka is extremely assertive in a way that is kind of endearing, I guess. I think that's part of the secret of her success. I think she manages to convey total seriousness about what she's doing, and earnestness that I think is really hard to say no to. That's my assessment anyway. And she's here, so be sure to ask her about her secret, and I'm sure she'll tell you.
Absolutely. I will ask you quickly another question, James. So we have Manasi, who is working on, have been working on different levels of testing and companies. She gets paid for only bugs that are approved, and she wants to know if there is any strategy so that she can raise valid defects.
Well, that's a terrible business model because it actually encourages testers to hide bugs. If you're really good at finding bugs and you want to take a break later on down the line, you might say, well, I'm just going to find 10 bugs and not report them and not tell anybody about them. And in fact, I might even tell people, oh, there's no bugs there. I already tested that, so that they won't try to find the bugs before I do. It's a twisted kind of incentive system that it's too bad that you are subjected to. But if you're in that system and you need to make progress, then I think what you ought to do, if I were you, what I'd be trying to do is figure out what everyone else was not doing. I would try to figure out what is the crowd going to do, and then I'm going to do the opposite of that. I'm going to do something very different. I'm going to use an interesting variety of data. I'm going to use different tools than other people use. I'm going to be trying to develop my skills to find secret doors where no one else can find them. But part of that is you have to be focused on risk. So you need to know risk better than anyone else, as well as you can possibly know it. That means what I mean by that is you got to get inside the heads of the people who approve your bugs, who say, yes, that's an important bug. You need to learn how they think. What are they worried about? And you need to know that actually better than they know it. Because if you just ask them, they might go, I don't know, the product shouldn't crash, whatever. They might not tell you what the important bugs are. But if you show them a certain bug, they might go, oh my God, you found a horrible bug. I'm so glad you found it. And you said, but it's a usability bug. And you said usability bugs weren't important. Well, that one is. So you have to become a student of other testers, and you have to become a student of the people that you serve so that you can make sure you are looking where other people aren't looking to find important bugs that they won't have found. Now, on top of that, there's a bunch of little techniques that I can suggest, little stress test techniques and that kind of thing that you might use to flush out some problems. But I don't have time to go through them here. Maybe I can answer them more on the forum.
One last question I would ask on behalf of the audience, James. You mentioned about testability work. Which
Yes.
testability are you talking about here? Is it intrinsic testability, project related, value related?
I'm talking about 5 kinds of testability that comprise what I call practical testability. And the kind that I was talking about that we were working on in the video we call it intrinsic testability. Intrinsic testability means how testable is something based on its design. So that's testability that's controlled by developers. If they design the product in one way, it's easy to test. If they design it another way, it's really hard to test. And by changing the design, by adding, for instance, adding ID tags to elements in an HTML system, you may make it much easier to automate. You make it much easier to look things up and to do things in the console, to change the state of things or to discover the state of things. So that's called intrinsic testability. There's other kinds of testability. There's subjective testability, which is testability that's based on the tester. If you're a better tester, then something might be easier for you to test than if you're a worse tester. Or project-related testability. Are you getting all the things you need in the project? Are you able to talk to the people you need to talk to? Value-related testability is, can you tell if there's a bug because you know what the customers want, you know what the risks are. That's called value-related testability. And the last one is epistemic testability, which sounds fancy. All it means is, if you're testing something that's already been tested, it's easier to test because you have less work to do to finish testing it. If you test something that no one has ever tested, that's less testable because you have a lot of work to do. So if you're testing something that's based on Chrome, that's more testable than if somebody says, I wrote my own browser. And you also have to test that at the same time that you test the browser application.
Excellent. Thank you so much, James. It has been a very, very, very interesting talk, and I would let you continue discussing with audience. And
all right, I'm going on to the Slack channel, and I'll answer any questions there until that peters out. Okay. Thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be here, Lalit and Mahesh, both of you. I must say, I don't respect a whole lot of people in the industry, but I respect Lalit. And I respect Mahesh. I think you two have high integrity, and you have good hearts, and you have a lot of talent, and I'm proud to support you.
Thank you so much, James. Thank you. See you in a bit. Bye.